Hello, SPI Academy. My name is Paul Wood. I'm a 59-year-old, four times over great grandfather, and I'm making my first foray into podcasting like a lot of you are. I just started taking all the classes with Pat. Things are going great. As you can see, I just set up my stuff here in my office. This is not really where I'm going to end up. The horrible backlighting is terrible, right? The place is a lot less a mess than it was the other day. But I'm kind of at a point where I'd like some feedback and perhaps some recommendations from y'all. Because I get to that point where I need to cross the first hurdle that we all come through. What the heck am I going to talk about? Okay? Because the problem is I can talk about a lot of things, a whole lot of things, because that's what I do. Most of my life, people have told me, Paul, you need to get into a spot where you are the one doing the talking and explaining difficult things to people. Of course, I've been told many, many times I have a face for radio, and I really do. I've talked on the radio quite a bit, mostly because I was 24 years in the U.S. Navy, speaking on the radio, talking to ships, aircraft, other people, admirals, other ships' captains, and stuff like that. And it just kind of came naturally, always has. Taught while I was in the Navy several times as an instructor. I'm a certified master training specialist. Taught ballistic missile defense because that was kind of my thing for a long time. After I got out, I taught again as a warfare tactics instructor for the Navy at the Surface and Mine Warfighting Development Command in Dahlgren, Virginia. So I taught the surface version of that course that you all saw Maverick attending in Top Gun, right? So the Surface Navy got smart and said, hey, those aviation guys got a good thing here. Why don't we make a school where we teach mid-career officers how to use the weapons on their ships the best that they can. So I did that for a while. I went to the Missile Defense Agency and helped develop weapon systems that would shoot down nuclear warheads in outer space. Left that a couple years ago. My wife and I opened an escape room business about 6 years ago. We're in our sixth year right now. And decided, to heck with working for the government. I want to be the captain of my own ship, and I am. I have a small business with my wife. Been doing that for quite a while. I've joked forever that I'm one of three Republicans to graduate from the political science department at the University of Minnesota, which is pretty much true. It was me, a guy named Jeff, a guy named Eric. That was about it on the right end of the political spectrum. A group of students that entered to go in there and eventually did end up graduating from there. Had a good education, though, learned a lot. I think my first idea for a podcast to do would be to call myself what I really am. I am a liberally educated conservative. I not only, went to the University of Minnesota, studied for a year at Seattle University with the Jesuits out in Seattle. That was great. I actually really liked that. I started off my college with 1 year in Missoula, Montana, because I grew up in Billings, Montana, graduated high school there. And if you don't know anything about Missoula, the 60s never died. They just kind of went to Missoula to rot for a while. So I've had an interesting, education in that effect. But other people have always told me, if you're not going to talk about political stuff, Paul, you should tell stories of your own life and the lives of your family, because I've done a lot, right, and been through a lot. I've been sober for 39 years. I went through drug and alcohol rehab when I was 20. That's a consequence of going to Missoula. That happens a lot. Went back to school again when I was in, Minnesota. That was a very interesting life journey to go through. Lived in Japan while I was in the service. That was an amazing experience for 5 years. I think the biggest thing and where I get most of my stories is the rest of my family. My father is a neurosurgeon, a retired neurosurgeon, right? I've been retired for a few years. I've been in and around the medical profession most of my life. The biggest members of the family are the senior Wood brothers and one sister. Starts with Chester, my grandfather, who was the head of the school system in Duluth, Minnesota, as the administrator for the whole system. Went for work for UNESCO for many years, rebuilding school systems around the world, in Peru, notably in Korea, right after the Korean War, and so forth. Took my father and his brother and sister with him to go do all those kind of things. Great stories there. Next brother down is Dr. Earl Howard Wood, the inventor of the G suit that pilots wear. He was the first person to ride the human centrifuge at the Mayo Clinic. He'll tell you he led the team that did that, right? Which is great because he was a very humble man, but probably the smartest person I've ever met. Very interesting. The head of the Mayo's Department of Physiology for 26 years. Told me great things like the proof of God is in your urine because your kidneys should not work, but they do. A lot of fun stuff like that. He met Werner von Braun after the war and other people associated with aerophysics and physiology in Nazi Germany as part of Operation Paperclip, if you ever heard of that. Next brother down, Delbert Leroy Wood was Special Agent Delbert Leroy Wood on the Chicago Gangland Task Force in the 1930s. He went to Munich to see the Olympics. He watched Jesse Owens win the gold medal. He saw Hitler stand up and walk out during the playing of the national anthem. He knew the men that got John Dillinger. He was not there at the time. And he went on to go work for J. Edgar Hoover personally during the Second World War, doing background investigations on people who wanted to get a job in the White House. That was interesting. Then one of the last things he did with the Bureau, he went down to Florida to get the Nazi saboteurs that were there that came ashore in Florida. There were two groups, one in New Jersey, one in Florida. He got the guys from Florida, interrogated them, brought them back to D.C., testified against them at the ex parte trial in the Supreme Court, and was there when they hung them. I've told people for a long time I don't understand all the hubbub about Guantanamo Bay. This issue is settled. If you are an illegal combatant, you get one trial, military tribunal, conviction is death. So these people should consider themselves lucky that they didn't end up like the saboteurs, right? Anyways, he left the Bureau in disgust in about 1945, before the war ended even, because he hated J. Edgar Hoover so badly. He did not like the way that he treated people, and he knew full well that the dirt that he gathered to do background investigations was being used to blackmail people. So he decided not to do that. Left there, went to work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and still had an interesting life working for the Pinkies, which is kind of cool. Then, Dr. Harlan Goffwood, Case Western Reserve University, nominated for the Nobel Prize in 1953. Unfortunately, that was the year that Watson and Crick were recognized for the discovery of DNA. His compatriots in the sciences, though, thought that that was kind of unfair, so he received the National Academy of Science Medal that year for his work on closing the Krebs cycle, which is how the body respirates sugars, right, and makes ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And, proceeded from the assumption that, well, we hyperventilate for a reason, so you must need carbon dioxide. And he proved that indeed you do, that's at the bottom of the Krebs cycle, a tiny bit of carbon dioxide gets metabolized, and if you don't have it, you hyperventilate, like we all know. Abe Wood was a internal medicine doctor during the Second World War in the Pacific, right? Was there during several big battles on the islands of the Pacific. Didn't know him very well. He died much younger, unfortunately, was a career smoker. Probably the most interesting one I liked was Louise Wood, the sister, who received the Congressional Medal of Freedom for her work with the Red Cross during the Second World War, and then went on to be the director of the Girl Scouts of America from 1962 to 1973. I mean, I got just tons of stories of these people, and people have said, well, tell stories about them. When I was in the Navy, I enlisted in 1988, was selected as a Chief Petty Officer, which was a great day, loved being Chief Wood. But then I got commissioned in 2004, as if I was a 6160 Surface Ordnance Officer, means I'm a Mustang, a limited duty officer, a former enlisted officer. And the job of a 6160 is to be the system test officer, right? But people always joke that system test officer, STO, stands for storytime officer. So I have plenty of stories to tell about, my family, my life, my time in the service, plenty of stuff like that. I do have a call sign. My call sign is Papa Smurf, right? I was on the boarding teams doing boardings during the Gulf, after the Gulf, or right before the Gulf War, I should say, when we were enforcing the sanctions against Iraq. People say, Papa Smurf, how'd you get that? I'm like, well, fat balloon full of stories, right? That's how you become Papa Smurf. So I thought about doing a podcast about that kind of stuff. Pat says there's riches in the niches, right? Find yourself a niche and exploit it. I mean, of course, I've been married for 32 years, very successful military family. Could do a blog about that. I've asked other young people, I'm like, hey, especially a young man I just met, you're about to get married. Do you think you and your wife would be interested in hearing advice from a couple who's been married for 32 years, who might give you some pointers on things to remember and do and have a successful, happily family life. He said, yeah, absolutely. So I thought about doing that angle. Um, I think the biggest thing that I would want really to talk about is much more broad, though. Like I said, I'm a political scientist. I have a degree in political science. And I look at what's going on today, and I can tell you that what is happening today is what the faculty at the University of Minnesota warned me about in 1985 when I was there, all right, as an entering, first year poli-sci student. Poli-sci 101 at the university at that time was taught by the department chairs, and literally the department chair taught the first week of poli-sci 101. And what he and the other department chairs had to teach us over the first 2 weeks was a series of warnings about what was going to happen with the American political system. And that's happened, right? Exactly what these people said was going to happen has happened. And it's not pleasant. It was not good. And the dysfunction you see today is exactly what they warned us about back then. I'd love to talk about that, but really more on a broad system term. I'm a system guy. That's what I do. I analyze systems, fixed systems, right? Found out what was broke, what we could do to make it better, and so forth. Did systems engineering work when I worked for the Missile Defense Agency. So I thought about, being the systems guy and talking about not just the political system, because obviously it's broke. There's plenty of other systems that are broke to do. I think, our medical system is broke. I can tell you that for certain. I think we all know that. Our social system is broke. I just saw the article came out the other day. We're at a point where 25% of people over 40 have never married and have no intent to marry. I'm telling you right now, that is disaster. That's terrible. And that's because I think there's several parts of our society that are very, very broken. Love to talk about stuff like that, mostly because it relates to one of my fascinations, and that is the Fermi paradox. If you're familiar with the Fermi paradox, Frank Drake made the Drake equation to try to quantify what is the chance of there being alien life out there. So that answer X is equal to a number of factors that go along here. And it was a good attempt to try to at least quantify it, right? To look at the things and the factors that are involved in it. Enrico Fermi in 54 looked at it and said, great, where are they? People ask, what do you mean, Enrico? Well, obviously X is greater than 0. There's no way it's 0. So if it's not 0, where are they? They should be here by now. We should see them. They should be around. And so people have talked about it for a great length of time. And when you study the Fermi paradox, you run across what's called the great filter, which is the idea that there is some sort of force, some factor that prevents alien species from developing to the point where they get to travel the stars. And there's many answers to why that could be. But in my opinion, we are beginning to feel the effects of that great filter today because of the confluence of the way that our systems are broken. We are in grave danger of not being a system or a society in the not too far distant future. I'd love to talk about that. So give me your thoughts. What do you think? I thought about a title being the liberally educated conservative. That could be one of them. Rent my brain. Thought about that too. Anything else? But I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.